Jim, after Proposition 3 passes, what are the implications if someone decides they want to stop someone from exercising their right to reproductive freedom? Is that even possible?
Well, I think to understand some of those implications, it's, again, important to read a little bit about what the proposition says.
Sure.
Could you read the second section of, the second sentence of the first section?
The second sentence says, an individual's right to reproductive freedom shall not be denied, burdened, nor infringed upon unless justified by a compelling state interest achieved by the least restrictive means.
So, that says that unless the state has a compelling state interest, you can't deny a person the right to their fundamental freedom, you can't burden it, and you can't infringe upon it.
And who's you?
Any person.
So I can't do that.
You can't infringe upon it. I don't believe you can. Now, there's a couple of questions here.
Yes.
I think the first obvious one is, what in the world is a compelling state interest? Well, actually, the proposition defines a compelling state interest. Do you see where that is?
I do, in Section 4.
Okay, again, and let's take a look at the wording of that language.
Sure. It says in Section 4, for the purposes of this section, a state interest is compelling only if it is for the limited purpose of protecting the health of an individual seeking care, consistent with accepted clinical standards of practice and evidence-based medicine, and does not infringe on that individual's autonomous decision-making.
So there's kind of a two-part test here to determine whether something is a compelling state interest. And you notice they're connected by the word and.
Yeah.
So that means you have to show that the first part exists and the second part.
Okay.
So now the first part is the state interest is limited to, that's all it can include, is protecting the health of the individual seeking care. So you have to have a person seeking care, and the regulation of the state or the restriction has to be limited to protecting that person's health.
Okay.
That's the first test. So then we go to the second test. That state interest cannot infringe upon that individual's autonomous decision making. So if you make a decision and the state decides, I don't like that decision, I'm going to say you can't implement or effectuate that decision, that would infringe on your decision making.
Yep.
So it has to help protect the person, and it can't infringe upon your decision making. Now, let me just ask you what your understanding would be with regard to certain things that people might think would be a state interest. Does the state have a compelling state interest to protect the health of the fetus?
I would say yes.
Under this definition?
Under this definition, no.
Okay, that's what we're going
Okay, that's
by.
what we're focusing. Okay, gotcha. Yes, we have. Okay, all right. Now
Okay.
now I get the game you're playing. Okay.
Okay. Because it's the interest in protecting the health of the fetus
Yeah.
is not protecting the health of the individual seeking care, and it would be infringing upon that. It could be infringing upon that individual's decision making.
Okay.
So that's not a compelling state interest.
Right.
How about, is it a compelling state interest that minors do not make poor decisions?
Definitely not.
Doesn't say that. No, absolutely not. Does the state have a compelling interest in promoting a family structure where parents at least have some involvement in the decision making of their minor children?
No.
No, it doesn't. Now, again, this is totally different than Roe versus Wade, because under Roe versus Wade, a state can have a compelling interest to protect the life of the fetus after viability. So this definition of, this is not going back to Roe versus Wade. Goes way beyond that. Now, I think you asked a question a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
How do you go, well, who has this right? Or how do you enforce this
Yeah,
right?
in the other video, we asked about
Yeah.
who has this right.
Okay, so everybody has the right, but how do they enforce this right? Now, if you have a constitutional right and somebody violates that right, can you take them to court to vindicate, to have a remedy for the violation of that right?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Now, if you would have asked me this
Okay.
6 months ago, I would have said, well, if you can find a statute or you can find some other legal authority that gives you a right to sue that person, yes, you can. But if it's not there, if you don't have a statute or something that says you can, no, you generally can't have a cause of action to vindicate your constitutional rights for a remedy. Now, less than 3 months ago, end of July of this year, the Michigan Supreme Court changed all that. And if you don't mind, I'm going to actually read from a case called Bauserman versus Unemployment Insurance Agency. I don't even have a citation for it, it's so new. Can't tell you what the where it is in Michigan reports, but it says this. It says, but when the Constitution itself has not delegated to other branches the authority to weigh those policy concerns, or when other branches have not stepped in to afford an adequate alternate remedy, this is the Supreme Court, inherent judicial authority requires us to afford a remedy for all constitutional violations, not just those that we think are wise or justified. So the Supreme Court this last July has said, yes, we have the authority now to create a judicial remedy. You are now going to start seeing lawsuits for people trying to enforce their individual rights that are granted to them under the Constitution. And if this goes into effect, I can almost guarantee you that within a year you're going to see several lawsuits for people trying to vindicate their constitutional rights.
So an example could be presented quite strongly of a mother seeking an abortion from a religious institution or hospital, requiring it because it is her right to make and effectuate all decisions on pregnancy, including but not limited to abortion care, as it's stated here. And that religious institution saying, well, we're not going to do that. That's morally against what we believe. And now you're saying the state of Michigan is coming in line with that mother's request that she has been wronged constitutionally and she has a right to take legal action against that institution.
I think that is exactly where we're headed on this. Now, I do want to address that, if it's okay, maybe in a later segment here.
Yeah.
Because I think there's some more background that we need before we can actually understand how that could possibly happen.
Okay.
Now, here, let me give you another example.
Okay.
Now, let's suppose we have a situation, a man and a woman. We're going to say they're both competent adults.
Fair enough.
We're going to say that they're both child-bearing years, okay?
They're older than 25.
Yeah.
Sure.
Somewhere in that time.
Okay.
And they decide that she's going to become pregnant by the usual method of sexual intercourse. I mean, it's not going to be in vitro fertilization or anything like that. Okay. So let me ask you this first. Does that decision relate to pregnancy?
Absolutely. They're deciding to get pregnant.
Yeah, it's kind of a stupid question. Does a decision to get pregnant relate to pregnancy?
I think it does.
I think the answer is yes.
Yes.
Does Proposition 3, if it should pass, give them the right to effectuate that decision?
To actually, they made the decision to get pregnant, now they're going to do the deed, they get pregnant.
And effectuate. Does it give them the right to effectuate?
Per the first sentence, it is very clear, yes, that it does.
Is there, from what you've read in the definition of a compelling state interest, is there a compelling state interest which would allow the state to prohibit, burden, or infringe upon that right?
Well, no, I mean, because there's no one seeking medical health care in that moment, and if the state came alongside of that, that would infringe on their autonomous decision-making.
Exactly. So that decision and the effectuation of that decision would be protected by this decision, by this proposal.
Sure.
Now let me add another fact to that, okay? Let's suppose that this man and this woman were brother and sister or first cousins.
Okay.
Now, under our current law,
Okay.
that criminal, sexual criminal conduct laws, that would be a 15-year felony. But does this, would that change your reading of whether or not this conduct is allowed? Whether or not they're still exercising a fundamental right?
Well, it's every individual, and we looked at, man, woman, child, but every individual would also include brother, sister. So I would include that there.
Or first cousins.
Or first cousins.
There's no compelling state interest, as it's defined here, that would prohibit incest. I mean,
Right.
It's not for no one seeking care. It's the same thing as you had before.
So let me ask you, though, that law, the incest laws on Michigan's books are already there. This is an amendment to the Constitution. Which one wins the day when challenged? This will challenge those incest laws, potentially. If it does, which one wins?
The Constitution.
Okay.
So it's my view that at least with regard to brother and sister, where we're not talking about minors, we have just competent adults,
Yep.
and cousins, that the incest law would be held to be unconstitutional.
Because
it violates the fundamental right
of
to
the Constitution.
reproductive freedom. Yes.
And so the incest law is passed by the legislature, went through that process. It's not an amendment to the Constitution.
That's correct.
So this, Proposition 3, if passed, puts this into the Michigan Constitution, which take precedent over anything the legislating bodies do.
Anything that they've done in the past and anything that they want to do in the future. That is correct.
And so by that examination of this language, you're saying incest can become a fundamental right in Michigan.
I'm saying at least with regard to brother and sister and first cousins.
First cousins.
I'm not going to go beyond that.
You're not going to say father-daughter.
No. Because in that type of situation, you might have a child doing this, but it would not because of their own autonomous decision.
They were not making the decision.
They were not making
So
the
the
decision.
state has a compelling interest at that point to step in.
The state, and if it's for the child's health and the child's not making the decision, then yes, then the state may very well have a compelling state interest.
It really does sound to me that Proposition 3, if it goes into law, will have broad ramifications on religious liberties, incest laws, and potentially parental rights. I encourage you to read the full language of this constitutional amendment that I've supplied on this website and know what you're voting for this November 8th.